What is up, heroes? This is Midnight Zero, and welcome back to the NCPL Season 4. This is Week 12, and we are going up against Manou, coach of the Fresno Flygons. This is a really big match. I lost last week, which was really silly because it's putting so much more pressure on this week than there really should have been, and I really should have just put forth more effort into last week's match. But regardless, Manou is a really good battler. If you recall from last season, I played him the very first match of the season, and I lost in a 270-something turn match that lasted over 2.5 hours. And yeah, and then I won every game after that leading up to the championship where we played him again, and I actually beat him in 12 turns because Thunderous. And what's really funny is he now has a Thunderous, and last season he had Toxapex and Shaman, but now I have Toxapex and Shaman. He has the Thunderous, so it's just kind of like a funny little play in that sense. I've really been looking forward to playing Manou. Manou is a good guy and a really good battler and a good sport, so it's just one of those battles that I think will just be a really good competition in that sense, in a very innocent manner. Just looking to play a good game is really, I think, what both of us are aiming for, and that's something I'm looking forward to. Regardless, Manou likes to play pretty offensively. He plays pretty aggressively, and he runs mons that hit pretty hard, but also sometimes have access to decent recovery and stuff like Synthesis or Roost or the Drain Punch, that sort of thing. But regardless, getting into his team, he's got Megalopony. Megalopony is a monster. You know, between Return and High Jump Kick, both of its stabs, it's hitting so hard. It's got Fake Out, it's got Ice Punch, and yeah, Scrappy to even hit those ghost types. Next up is Deoxys Speed, which is his Z-Mon, which is scary because of the move pool of Deoxys. It gets so many different types of moves. It is really a threat to any team, and it requires a significant amount of scouting before you can feel comfortable with any one Mon in against it, which is really difficult to prep for. I honestly kind of prepped for it just like Mew, anticipating, you know, it could run Z pretty much whatever, and I'm just gonna have to scout for it. But next up is Skarmory. Skarmory is a pain. It's super physically defensive. Scizor is technically bulkier though, and what's really difficult about Skarmory is reliable recovery and Roost. It can phase things out with Whirlwind. It can set up spikes. It can set up rocks. It can taunt. It can use its defensive stat to get big damage off with stuff like Counter, and overall just being an annoyance for most teams. Next up is Muck, and Muck is also a really good mon in my opinion. It's a really great pursuit trapper and a great knockoff user, especially with spreading poisons around, which is really annoying. And he typically runs Assault Vest Muck, which is fitting. What's another thing that complicates this is it gets access to Fire Blast and Fire Punch, which make it that much more difficult to deal with. Next up is Vaporeon. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Vaporeon, but it is decently bulky. It's got access to Wish and Protect. It can Scald, toxic things. It's a water immunity, which is relevant. And in the rain, it can heal itself from status, either or with the Water Absorber Hydration. But definitely something worth noting. I mean, like, you're going to go through this team and none of Manou's Pokemon are bad. Like, that's just, like, he's good at drafting and he's a good battler. You're not going to look at his team and be like, oh, that's a waste of a pick. Or like, oh, why in the world did he, like, grab that? Like, there's this Mon that's better. You know, Manou drafted a solid team. But next up is Victini. Victini is one of those Pixie-Mons, right? So it makes it really difficult to prep for because of its base 100 stats all around. It's also got access to V-Create, which is a monstrous move. It's got Bolt Strike. It can Calm Mind, stuff with like Searing Power, Stored Power. It's a really difficult Mon to prep for, in my opinion. It could also run Glaciate and I think Blue Flare. So special, physical, you know, the coverage on both sides is really good. And I think in the past he typically runs Scarf Victini, so I'm going to be watching out for that. Next up is Thunderous Eye. Thunderous Eye is a scary mon. Its base 111 speed stat puts it in a pretty solid tier, and you know, base 125 special attack is nothing to laugh at. With access to Thunderbolts, the only thing its weakness per se is that it doesn't have stab flying type move outside of Hidden Power flying, but it gets access to Focus Blast, Superpower, Knockoff, I think Sludge Wave, Grass Knot, Incinerate. You know, it's got great move pool coverage and access to both Nasty Plot and Agility, which means it's a very potent sweeper. Unfortunately though, it doesn't have Volt Absorb, so that's worth noting. Next up is Primarina, which is another kind of bulky offense mon. It's tanky enough to take hits decently well, while also having a strong enough special attack stat to get good damage off. And it also has great coverage. Between Moonblast, Psychic, Hydro Pump, and Energy Ball, it hits a lot of things really hard. And then there's Roserade. Roserade in and of itself is a difficult mon to deal with. It can set up spikes, it can set up T-spikes, it can sleep powder things, and it can also, hit really hard, base 125 special attack. A lot of his mons either have, base 125 or 130 of one of their attack stats, and make it that much more difficult to deal with. Some of them are close to that stat in both physical and special offense, which is crazy. But yeah, Roserade, great coverage as well between Leaf Storm and Sludge Bomb, and Hidden Power Fire probably. It hits hard, and Sleep Powder gets it a turn to set up a T-Spike or to hit something that's coming in pretty much for free. Next up is Kofagrigus. I'm not a huge fan of going against Kofagrigus. It's so annoying to deal with from a mummy standpoint. It can Pain Split on things, it can Will-O-Wisp things, it can Shadow Ball, it can run Nasty Plot, Trick Room. It's a pretty annoying mon to deal with, but it's not impossible. So I'm not too worried about it, but it could definitely present a bit of a challenge if the right mons get weakened. Next up is Curum. Curum is one of those mons that hits really hard on the physical and the special side. It makes it that much more difficult to deal with. Base 130 attack and special attack. Its really only weakness is its speed, which is base 95. It's also got decent natural bulk, 125 HP, 90 defense, and 90 SPDF. It's got great all-around bulk. Ice Beam, Draco Meteor, Outrage, Dragon Claw, Earth Power, Hidden Power Fire, and honestly, that's really all you need with this mon. You can run Sub Roost, which he's run a couple times, and I think that's the scariest set in my opinion. Next up is Scizor. Scizor I'm very familiar with, but he uses his Scizors a lot more offensively than I do, typically running Choice Band with Knockoff or Superpower, SD, Bullet Punch, etc., rather than the bulky pivot that I typically use it for. Regirock is really bulky. Even super effective physical attacks aren't doing that much because of its base 200 defense. It's a really reliable rock setter, and unfortunately also gets access to Fire Punch, which makes it that much more difficult to deal with from a steel type standpoint. So definitely need to watch out for that. And then there's Landorus Eye, which thanks to not having Sheer Force isn't absolutely broken, but it does have a great move pool: Sludge Wave, Earth Power, I think Stone Edge, Rock Slide, Earthquake, and there are a couple other moves in there too. It gets access to Rock Polish, meaning it can be that much more threatening. So yeah, overall very scary team, very balanced team in that he can take advantage of slower, stallier teams by roosting with his more offensive mons that are decently bulky already, so they're not going to take a ton from his any attack really. I think one of the few weaknesses is that he doesn't have a lot of healing support. He has Wish support with Vaporeon, and then he's got potentially Heal Bell on Mega Lopunny or Vaporeon, but outside of that, he's somewhat susceptible to status. But even then, he's got, types like Skarmory, which are great, reliable defoggers. He's got 2 poison types that are grounded that can soak up T-Spikes, and, he's got a Defog Scizor potentially too. So, I don't know. He's got a great team, in my opinion. Really well done. Definitely not my type of team, and that is more offensive, but definitely a good one nonetheless. So, it was really tough to prep for him, but I gave it my best shot. So, let's get into my team. The first one we're going to talk about is not showing apparently. The first one we're going to talk about, spoiler for the rest of them I guess, is Garchomp. We actually are running a pretty interesting Garchomp set. We're running Yachi, SD, Garchomp. And the idea here is we have enough speed to outspeed everything relevant, which is, Landorus. And we hit really hard with Earthquake and Dragon Claw. Just looking at his team, all of his bulky mons don't appreciate taking those except for Skarm, which is why we have Fire Blast. But I come in on Victini, or not necessarily on Victini, but Roserade, Victini, Regirock, Scizor, Curum, Muck, all of those mons don't want to take an Earthquake, and Dragon Claw is going to be doing quite a bit too from like a neutral coverage standpoint as well. And if he wants to go into something like Vaporeon on an anticipated Earthquake, I can SD up and then do a ton of damage. Same with Kofagrigus. It's taking, I think, 55% from a +2 Earthquake, so all I need to do is weaken that a little bit, and it's taking quite a bit of damage. I also just naturally outspeed a lot of his bulkier mons, so I can start hitting things pretty hard. Fire Blast is there for Skarmory. If he's a Fizz-Def Skarm, it will 2-hit KO him. If it's not, it'll do quite a bit of damage, and it has a chance to burn, and it forces him to roost, and on the roost I can get into other members of my team that can threaten Skarmory more immediately. But why the Yachi Berry? Well, the thing is, I very much anticipate getting a kill with Garchomp and him going into something like Deoxys Speed or Mega Lopunny to try to revenge kill me. I'm going to be sitting at +2. He needs to go into something that outspeeds me and will knock me out with an Ice-type move. Outside of Kyurem, I live most Ice-type moves, whether it's Ice Punch, Ice Beam, or Hidden Power Ice, from his Mons that would outspeed my Garchomp. And I bait that Ice-type attack, and then I go for a +2 Earthquake and knock out whatever that Mon is, which drastically reduces the offensive pressure his team can apply on my other fast Mons. So I definitely think that we can get utility out of it. I do need to make sure I stay above 65 to 75-ish%, so that I can utilize that Yache Berry effectively. Alright, what's up next? The next Mon on our team is going... Oh, I should mention the attack stat is just so I get relevant 2-hit KOs. I didn't need all of the all the attack there. I forget what the exact 2-hit KO was. I think it was Kofagrigus after Leftovers at +2, or Regirock at +2, 2-hit KO. Something like that. Something like that. Or I think it's Earthquake into +2 Earthquake knocks out Vaporeon. But I didn't need all the attack, so the rest went into HP and defense to help out with really utilizing that Yache Berry. But next up is going to be Mega Scizor. I needed something to do with Mega Lopunny, and this is it. It's max physically defensive Mega Scizor with Bullet Punch, U-Turn, Swords Dance, and Roost. Very typical, very standard Midnight Zero use of Scizor. You know, Mega Lopunny hits really hard. I think this does like... I live 2 high jump kicks after rocks from full, which is, you know, part of why I wanted this. I roost up on high jump kick, which of course is a scary move to go for when if you miss, you know, you lose half your health. Bullet Punch is there for priority late game. I can potentially sweep after an SD, depending on what Mons are left around. U-Turn is there for momentum. You know, same deal as every single week I bring this sort of Scizor. It's here for the exact same reasons. I do need to scout for a lot of Fire-type moves on his Mons. Need to be wary of Scald Burns. It also, outside of Mega Lopunny, it kind of walls Skarm. It takes hits from just about everything. It's an Ice resist, it's a Dragon resist, it's a Poison immunity, it's a Fairy resist, it is a Scizor wall. It deals with things pretty well, so that's why it's here. Next up is going to be Raikou. I wanted some more offense, and Raikou hasn't really done a lot every time I've brought it, but I feel like it's one of those in theory mons that does really well, but needs to be played very perfectly in order to actually have it do something. So I'm going to be very wary of that this match. The Raikou speed tier at 115, you know, it outspeeds everything outside of his like first 2 mons. Those Deoxys Speed and the Mega Lopunny, and, you know, of course, Scarfers. So naturally, its speed tier puts it in a great offensive position. It also has great coverage against his team. Thunderbolt hits everything neutrally, and when it doesn't, HP Ice hits. You know, the only exception is really Kyurem. That is kind of more of a pain to deal with. Also, that said, he needs to worry about stuff like Aura Sphere or Shadow Ball that I could be running. And that's gonna be scary for him. The other thing is, you know, I threaten Skarmory. Skarmory is really much a threat to deal with, and I lure Muck or Roserade or Kyurem in, and that's the thing. That's why Garchomp and Raikou have such great synergy in this match. Raikou comes in and threatens one of those Mons out, or threatens some Mon that takes Garchomp's hits really well, goes for Volt Switch, and then, you know, tempts the Skarn or the Muck or the Roserade or the Kofagrigus even to come in and take some damage, and then I go into Garchomp, and then I threaten something out again. It potentially takes rocks damage, and it potentially has to take an Earthquake as well, and can't afford to recover. I can't afford to give his team a break to heal up. So yeah, in the early game, it's going to be a lot of Volt Switching. And then late game, you know, Thunderbolt is doing quite a bit of damage because, you know, Raikou's no pushover, and Calm Mind boosts up that attack quite a bit. So if, you know, Deoxys is weakened, if Lopunny is weakened, I can take one hit from most of those Mons and Calm Mind up once, or at +1, afford to take a hit and then knock that out, and then hit everything that remains with a +1, you know, Thunderbolt. So definitely a late game sweeper, but also helping out with this sort of Volt Turn core that could prove to be really difficult for him to deal with if I play it well enough. As far as the EVs go, I only need enough special attack to KO certain things. I don't exactly remember off the top of my head, but the idea was, you know, Thundurus, Landorus. I needed a 2-hit KO most things with Thunderbolt, especially at +1. Oh, and there goes the music. For those of you wondering, I've been in a very Atelier mood lately, so that was what you were hearing, and it's auto-playing to the next one. Great. As far as Raikou goes, I need to play it well with Volt Switch. It's going to get momentum, and the HP is to help out with leftovers in particular. Pressure could be relevant too. I hope it's not, but it could be. Yeah. Next up is Toxapex. We are running Scald Infestation, Toxic, and Recover, the typical Trapper Pex. The idea here is Scald Burns are really annoying for him to deal with. I definitely want to Scald Burn, Lopunny, Skarmory, Muck, Scald hits Victini. I just want to Scald Burn everything, pretty much. And if I don't, there are some mons that I want to Toxic, like Kofagrigus. I definitely want to Toxic. Kyurem, I want to Toxic as well. Victini would be nice to Toxic. A lot of these mons don't appreciate a Toxic. And at the same time, though, I can't really afford to get up T-Spikes, because I can almost guarantee you Muck is coming along, and if not, Roserade should be coming along. So I don't think T-Spikes will be easy to get up, especially with access to a reliable Defogger that isn't affected by Toxic, that I can't really pressure with Poison turns. I feel like T-Spikes are going to be really difficult to get up. So I do want to Toxic the things that I can, when I can, and I also want to trap things. What's going to come in on a Toxapex? Potentially Deoxys Speed, which doesn't appreciate the infestation damage, nor the chip. Alolan Muck. Once that thing is in, it's trapped, and then it's dead pretty much. I can recover up on it and take it out, and that thing is a pain to deal with. That requires a lot of chip damage over time. Skarmory doesn't like being trapped. I can Infestation, and it'll take a little bit of chip damage at the end of each turn, and then I can go for Scald Burns and ensure that I get that burn on something. Same with Vaporeon. Vaporeon, I can Infestation and then Toxic it, and then it's kind of dead. That's really the mentality here. Even Kofagrigus, right? I can Toxic it after going for Infestation. And Scizor comes in. Gives me a chance to get a Scald Burn, or forces him to go for U-turn, trying not to get trapped. So that's really the rationale here. I'm also a great Mega Lopunny answer. The defense here is so that I don't get 2 KO'd by return after rocks. And yeah, I also, force him to reconsider going for fire type attacks with Victini. I bait electric type attacks from Thunderous Eye. I tank Primarina's stab type attacks, and I also bait Earth Powers from Kyurem, in addition to taking ice type attacks really well. And it's a decent knockoff switching. I don't really want to let this thing's Black Sludge get knocked off though. It's also really helpful for Scizor and Regirock potentially too. So that's why it's here. The rest went into Spadef because I needed it to potentially take Spadef hits more, whether that's from Deoxys, whether that's from Thundurus to potentially get off a Toxic, whether that's a Draco from Kyurem or something like that, or if I get the prediction wrong, right? I need to be able to sponge those hits at times. Next up is Bronzong. I needed a Stealth Rocker, and this was the thing for the job. Gyro Ball, Toxic, Stealth Rock, and Protect. I was really, really tempted to put something like Psychic on here as well, but it just didn't quite work. Gyro Ball does more damage to anything than Psychic would, or if it does, or if Psychic does do more, I think it does like only 5% or so more, while Gyro Ball still 2-hit KOs most things like Thundurus and Deoxys Speed and Mega Lopunny, which is why I'm fine with using Gyro Ball. Toxic is there because there are certain mons that I would just much rather Toxic, like Kofagrigus, potentially Regirock, potentially Landorus Eye, or Thundurus Eye if necessary. I'm max Spadef, so I can take hits from those mons. Not many, but I can in a last-ditch effort to get some damage off to put it in Bullet Punch range. I think Thundurus Eye after rocks and Gyro Ball damage is in Bullet Punch range, so that's particularly relevant. What else? Rocks are really helpful in this match, just chipping away all of his mons, especially with the Volt Turn Core. I need to get rocks up, and it also pressures Skarmory to go for Defog rather than set up his own hazards, which is, scary in and of its own right. Protect is there, so I get a little bit more chip with Toxic damage, and I get a little bit of leftovers recovery. It's also there to play mind games with Mega Lopunny. High Jump Kick does, I think, like 65-70% to me, and my Gyro Ball 2-hit KOs him. So between getting that 50-50 right, I guarantee I get at least 50% damage on him and potentially even knock him out. He will probably try to bait out the Protect first and see if I have it, so I'm going to intentionally not reveal the Protect until it's relevant. But The last Mon I have is Gliscor. This was a Mon I really had a difficult time picking. I didn't know if I wanted to bring Gliscor. It doesn't do incredibly, but it does alright. And I don't know, even with the moves, I was like, do I want Knockoff? Do I want Toxic? Do I want Defog? Do I want Roost? Do I want Taunt? Do I want Earthquake? Do I want U-Turn? Like, there was so much to consider. I ended up going with Earthquake, Toxic, Defog, and Taunt. Defog because his hazards are scary. He can set up spikes, he can set up T-spikes and rocks, and I don't want to deal with those. Like, I just straight up don't want to deal with those. Toxic is there for anything that would otherwise set up on me, whether it's Thundurus, Landorus, Kyurem, something like that. And Earthquake is there to hit Muck, Roserade, pretty much everything. I have enough speed to outspeed Primarina so that I can get damage off on that, or a Toxic off on that in a last-ditch effort, or a last-ditch Defog on one of those Mons. This is not a longevity Gliscor. This is a Gliscor that will take damage and will probably die within a few, within taking a few hits. Taunt is there so that I can prevent Skarmory from continuing to set up, and I can force Skarmory to attack, and that provides a safer in for stuff like Raikou and Garchomp. Taunt is also there to prevent Vaporeon from going for something like Wish if it wants to try to heal up, or Wish Pass to heal other things. It prevents Scizor from going for SD, it prevents Cofagrigus from going for anything other than Shadow Ball, prevents Roserade from going for Sleep Powder or setting up hazards of its own, and it prevents Regirock from getting up rocks. So this is a Mon that is going to use its ability to Taunt to prevent his Mons from healing up, while probably not doing too much damage in and of itself between Earthquake and Toxic. It's going to keep hazards off the field, and it's going to keep his Mons from healing up as well as it can, so that the rest of my team can sweep. And that's the team. I feel okay about it. I should mention the defense is to not get too KO'd by Choice Scarf, V-Create after Rocks. And the rest of it went into Spadef to help out with, or to have a better chance at living a non-Life Orb boosted Hidden Power Ice from both Thundurus and Landorus, and a Leaf Storm from Life Orb Roserade. But the team, I feel decent about. I don't feel perfect though. It's not as reliable of a defensive core as I really would like. It's going to require more aggressive play, and that's particularly scary against Manou because that's his game. He plays aggressively. I might need to call him out on that a bit. Watching him play Balance against Max in particular, he went, that one step ahead. He thought, oh, I have Kyurem and he has a Florges. He's going to go into Florges. And then rather than hit, whatever was in front of him with an Ice Beam, he just went for Iron Head right off the bat. Didn't bother seeing if that was even his initial switch in. So I do think I might need to call him out on that and make some of those more aggressive plays to get my Raikou in, to get my Garchomp in. That said, I don't want to be too risky, and I don't want to lose my only offensive presence too early on in the match. So it should be a good game. I hope you guys are looking forward to it. I definitely am. I'm really nervous. At the same time, I'm still trying to work on my mentality where I don't put too much weight on this. I feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform at fear of people's impression of me changing, or people doubting my skill or something like that. A lot of other people focused qualities, but I'm working on it. And hopefully we can win this. Hopefully we can secure first place in the regular season and secure that playoff bye. But we'll see what happens. At the end of the day, I'm really just hoping for a good, fun, challenging match. And yeah, that's all I'll ask for. But I'll see you guys in the battle. But until then, this has been Night Zero, and this mission is complete.